Have you ever stopped for a moment and truly reflected on why you do what you do? Why did you choose to wear that specific outfit this morning? Why did you choose coffee over tea? Why did you click on this video and not on the countless others that were competing for your attention? We go through life with a fundamental assumption that we are the captain of our own ship, that every choice, every move, every word is a result of our own free will. We feel we are completely in control of ourselves, the masters of our own thoughts and actions. But what if this idea of free will is just an elaborate illusion, a highly convincing narrative created by our brain to give a sense of coherence to a series of complex biological and chemical processes, most of which we are not even aware of? For centuries, the idea of free will was the territory of philosophers. However, in recent decades, science has entered this debate in a startling way. It all began with a simple yet revolutionary experiment conducted by neuroscientists. Imagine an experiment where you are asked to sit in front of a screen with sensors attached to your head. You are asked to do the simplest of things. Raise your finger at any moment you wish. You feel completely free to choose that moment, right? You think, okay, now I will raise my finger, and you do it. However, the results were astonishing. The scientists monitoring your brain activity found something called a readiness potential, a wave of neural activity that begins in your motor cortex. What was shocking was that this wave of activity began several hundred milliseconds before you became consciously aware of the decision to raise your finger. Your brain had already decided before your conscious mind even caught up. The decision was seemingly made unconsciously, and our consciousness was merely a spectator who saw the decision happen, then claimed it as its own. This was a deeply unsettling discovery. If the decision to raise a finger, a seemingly trivial act, isn't initiated by our consciousness, then how confident can we be about the bigger, more complex decisions in our lives? Who is really making the call? Is it the conscious you, or is it a series of neural impulses that precede your awareness? If we are a passenger who thinks we are the captain, how far does this illusion extend? This question stretches far beyond the lab. Think about your preferences. Why do you prefer one type of music over another? Why are you attracted to one person and not to another? Why do you have a certain temperament? Are you anxious or are you laid back? We often think that these are part of who we are, a result of the choices we have made. But the more we understand our brain and biology, the clearer it becomes that many of these inclinations are shaped by factors well beyond our control. Our genetics provide the blueprint for our temperament. Our childhood experiences form our neural connections. Our hormones and neurotransmitters influence our mood and motivation. Every exposure we've ever had, every interaction we've ever been in, has shaped the intricate architecture inside our heads that guides our every step. This is not an argument that life is predetermined. It is an argument that our free will might not be as deep or as powerful as we think. Instead, we may be a fantastically complex product of nature and nurture, with a highly skilled narrator, our consciousness, telling us a convincing story about choice, even though that story might have been written long before we were even aware of it. This illusion of free will is just the beginning of our journey to unravel the greatest mystery of all: why we do what we do. Throughout this series, we will delve into the labyrinth of the human mind, exploring the dark corners of the unconscious and examining the intricate mechanisms of the brain that shape our every thought, every emotion, and every action. We will challenge the fundamental assumptions about who we are and what drives us. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about yourself, because this journey will take us to the very limits of self-understanding and might make you see every decision you make from an entirely new perspective.
Behind the curtain of our consciousness, a remarkably complex machine works tirelessly: the brain. If we were to liken it to a corporation, the brain isn't a single office with one manager sitting at a desk. Instead, it's a giant conglomerate with various departments operating simultaneously, each with its own tasks and agendas. To understand why we do what we do, we need to peek inside this incredible operating system, recognize its key players, and see how they interact to guide our every decision. One of the key and most often misunderstood players is dopamine. Often labeled the pleasure molecule, dopamine's role is actually far more complex and much more powerful. Dopamine is the molecule of motivation and anticipation. The brain's dopamine system isn't really about the reward itself. but about the promise or anticipation of that reward. It's a reward-seeking engine that drives us to act. Imagine a baker smelling a fresh-baked cake. A massive dopamine release happens not when they eat the cake, but when they smell it, driving them to seek out the cake and eat it. This is the fundamental mechanism behind how we form habits. Our brain learns that a certain action, like picking up our phone, will be followed by a potential reward, a social media notification, and the dopamine released reinforces that behavior, making us more likely to repeat it again and again. But dopamine is only one part of the equation. It's the drive, but not the deliberation. For long-term deliberation, we turn to the most human part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Located right behind our forehead, this part of the brain serves as the executive manager of the mind. It is responsible for planning, abstract thought, risk assessment, and most importantly, impulse control. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that allows us to delay instant gratification for a greater reward in the future. It's the rational voice that says, "Don't eat that ice cream right now because you'll feel better later if you eat a healthy meal." But inside the corporate brain, there isn't always harmony. The prefrontal cortex often has to negotiate with a far older and more primitive department, the limbic system. This is our emotional center, and its main player is the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional alarm, responsible for our fight-or-flight response. It can trigger a powerful emotional response like fear, anger, or euphoria in a fraction of a second, long before the prefrontal cortex has a chance to think rationally. Imagine you're walking in the woods and see something that looks like a snake. Your amygdala will trigger a fear response before your prefrontal cortex has had time to analyze whether it's a real snake or just a piece of rope. The conflict between the emotional amygdala and the rational prefrontal cortex is one of the greatest dramas inside our heads. The interaction between these three systems, the motivating dopamine, the planning prefrontal cortex, and the reactive amygdala, is at the core of our decision-making. Think of a simple example. You're standing in front of the fridge after a long, tiring day. Your fatigued prefrontal cortex might say, "You should eat a salad because it's good for you." But your dopamine system, hungry for an instant reward, screams, "Grab the ice cream. It's delicious, you deserve it." At the same time, your stress-sensitive amygdala might be triggering a desire to seek comfort in food. The decision you ultimately make isn't a single, conscious choice, but the result of a complex negotiation between these three parts. Furthermore, our brain is incredibly good at forming habits. Habits are a series of behaviors that become automatic through repetition, a way for the brain to conserve energy. They are formed through a three-part cycle. The cue, a trigger that starts the habit. This could be a specific time, e.g. 5 p.m., a location, your kitchen, or a feeling, stress. The routine, the actual action you take in response to the cue, e.g. opening the fridge and grabbing the ice cream. The reward, the benefit you get from the routine which reinforces the cycle, the delicious taste of the ice cream. Over time, this cycle becomes incredibly efficient, creating deep neural pathways that we can liken to a well-worn path in a field. The more you travel it, the clearer and easier the path becomes. This is why it's so difficult to break bad habits. The underlying neural pathways have become a highly efficient superhighway. In short, decision-making is not a single conscious choice. It is the result of negotiation, conflict, and cooperation between various systems within our brain. While we feel like we are in complete control, much of what we do is driven by forces operating beneath our conscious awareness, from the motivating drive of dopamine to the emotional responses of the amygdala. Understanding how these systems work is the first step to understanding why we are who we are. As social creatures, our need for connection and interaction with others is fundamental, as vital as our need for food and water. Why do we feel so uncomfortable when we are alone for extended periods? Why does social rejection hurt so much? The answers to these questions lie deep within our biology and evolution. Our brains are hardwired to seek and maintain social bonds because, throughout the history of human evolution, being in a group dramatically increased our chances of survival and procreation. A group provided safety from predators, access to resources, and the opportunity to share knowledge and skills. Consequently, our brains have developed powerful mechanisms to encourage social behavior and punish isolation. One of the key players in social bonding is the hormone oxytocin, often called the love hormone or bonding hormone. Oxytocin is released during positive social interactions, such as hugging, holding hands, or even just making warm eye contact. This release of oxytocin triggers feelings of trust, empathy, and attachment, strengthening our social relationships. The oxytocin system works like a social glue, helping us form and maintain the bonds that are essential for our well-being. In addition to oxytocin, our brain also has a system that is incredibly sensitive to social rejection. The very same areas of the brain that are active when we feel physical pain are also active when we experience social rejection or exclusion. This suggests that social rejection is processed by the brain as a literal and tangible threat to our survival. This social pain drives us to avoid behaviors that could lead to exclusion and to work hard to be accepted by our group. Our need for connection is also reflected in how our brains process information about others. We have mirror neurons that allow us to automatically mimic and understand the emotions and actions of others. This system allows us to empathize, to feel what others are feeling, and to coordinate with others in a group. The ability to understand other people's thoughts and feelings, known as theory of mind, is a critical social skill that allows us to interact effectively in a complex social world. So why are we so bad at being alone? Because our brains have evolved to be deeply social. The need for connection is embedded in our biology, driven by hormones processed as a fundamental need, and facilitated by complex neural mechanisms. Chronic loneliness and social isolation not only cause psychological discomfort, but can also have significant negative impacts on our physical and mental health. We are wired for connection, and our well-being is deeply dependent on the quality and quantity of our social relationships. Memory is the very foundation of our identity. It forms the narrative of our lives, connecting our past, present, and future. We tend to trust our memories as accurate recordings of the events that have happened. However, decades of scientific research have revealed a shocking truth. Memory is not a perfect video recording. It's more like a flawed construction that is constantly being rebuilt every time we recall it. When we experience an event, the information isn't stored in one single location in the brain. Instead, different aspects of the experience, the visuals, the sounds, the emotions, and so on, are broken down and stored in various brain regions. When we try to recall that event, our brain has to reassemble these fragments of information and put them together into a coherent narrative. This process of reconstruction is highly susceptible to errors and distortions. One of the most common sources of memory distortion is suggestion. If we are given misleading information about an event, especially after it has occurred, this false information can easily be integrated into our memory, making us remember things that never actually happened. This phenomenon has been well documented in research on eyewitness testimony, where eyewitnesses who are exposed to misleading information after witnessing a crime often recall incorrect details. In addition to suggestion, our memory is also influenced by our current biases and expectations. We tend to recall the past in a way that aligns with our current view of ourselves and the world. For example, if we now have a positive view of a past relationship, we might tend to remember the interactions in that relationship as being more positive than they actually were. Conversely, if we have a negative view, our memories might tend to focus on the negative aspects. Emotions also play a powerful role in memory formation and retrieval. Memories associated with strong emotions, both positive and negative, tend to be more easily remembered. However, the intensity of the emotion can also lead to distortion. Traumatic memories, for instance, can be incredibly vivid, but also highly fragmented and inaccurate. Furthermore, the very act of remembering can change a memory. Every time we access a memory, our brain is actually reconstructing it. In this process of reconstruction, the memory can be updated, modified, or even combined with new information. This means that our memories are not static entities. They are things that are constantly changing over time. The implications of this unreliable nature of memory are profound. Our memory is the basis of our sense of self, but if that memory itself can be wrong, how certain can we be about the narrative of our own lives? Acknowledging that our memory is not a perfect recording is the first step to understanding just how complex and sometimes deceptive our minds can be. Throughout our journey, we have seen the brain as a miracle, a machine unparalleled in its ability to learn, adapt, and respond to the world. However, within every powerful system, there lies a weakness, a profound vulnerability that can turn a source of strength into a source of destruction. This is the climax of our story. The dark side of the mind, a condition where the brain's reward system, designed for survival, is hijacked and used against us. This is the science behind addiction, The core of addiction lies in the perversion of the very reward system we have discussed. The dopamine pathways, which are supposed to motivate us to seek things essential for survival, like food, water, and social connection, are flooded with a massive dopamine spike by addictive substances. While naturally released dopamine provides a healthy drive, substances like drugs, alcohol, or even certain behaviors like gambling can trigger a dopamine surge 5 to 10 times more potent than anything found in a natural state. The brain processes this experience as something incredibly important, a priority that overrides everything else. However, the brain is an organ designed for balance or homeostasis. When the dopamine pathways are constantly flooded, the brain responds in a logical yet devastating way. It gradually reduces the number of dopamine receptors or decreases their sensitivity. This is like turning down the volume on a radio because the sound is too loud. Consequently, the addicted person needs a larger dose or a higher intensity just to feel the same effect, a phenomenon known as tolerance. This is the point where using the substance is no longer about seeking pleasure, but about seeking normalcy, trying to bring the brain back to its baseline dopamine level. This process creates a vicious cycle. When the addictive substance is stopped, the brain that has adapted experiences a dopamine deficit. This leads to deeply unpleasant withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, depression, irritability, and an overwhelming craving. To alleviate this pain, the person is compulsively driven to seek the substance or behavior again, no longer for the high they anticipate, but to escape the suffering. This is the tragic shift from liking to craving, from the pursuit of reward to the avoidance of pain. Addiction doesn't just hijack the reward system, it also significantly damages the other parts of the brain we have gotten to know. The prefrontal cortex, the executive manager responsible for impulse control and rational decision-making, becomes progressively weaker. Simply put, addiction short-circuits our ability to think long-term and consider consequences. It strengthens the pathways associated with impulsive desire, driven by the limbic system, while simultaneously weakening the pathways associated with self-control, driven by the prefrontal cortex. This explains why an addicted person may continue to use a substance or engage in a destructive behavior, even though they are aware it is ruining their life. They are not making a rational choice. They are responding to a neurological drive that has overpowered their ability to control themselves. What makes addiction so difficult to overcome is that it changes the brain on a fundamental and long-lasting level. Scientists now view addiction as a chronic brain disease, not a moral failing. The changes to the brain structure and function can last long after the use has stopped, which explains why relapse rates are so high. The memories of the overwhelming reward, called associative learning, are deeply embedded in the brain, making a trigger, like a certain place or person, capable of igniting an intense craving even years after quitting. It is crucial to remember that addiction can take many forms, not just limited to chemical substances like drugs and alcohol. Addictive behaviors, such as gambling, video gaming, social media use, and even shopping, all activate the brain's reward system in the same way. For susceptible individuals, these behaviors can quickly turn from hobbies into a compulsive need, causing devastating consequences in their lives. This is proof that our brain's reward system is universal and vulnerable to being hijacked, regardless of what is triggering it. Addiction is a painful reminder of how fragile our minds are to manipulation, and how a system designed to give us pleasure and motivation can be hijacked and turned against us. It is the pinnacle of the mind's weaknesses, a condition where we lose control, not due to a lack of willpower, but because the brain itself has been altered. Understanding the science behind addiction is the first step to developing effective prevention and treatment strategies, and to offering hope to those who are caught in its grip. It is the ultimate challenge for science, and a clear testament to why we don't always do what we want. After exploring the complexities and vulnerabilities of our minds, the inevitable question is, are we truly powerless against our brain's mechanisms? The good news is that we are not. On the contrary, the human brain possesses a remarkable ability to change and adapt throughout our entire lives, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. Understanding the principle of neuroplasticity gives us immense hope and the tools to hack our brains and make lasting positive changes in our lives. Neuroplasticity is the brain's superpower. It's the ability of our neural pathways to reorganize themselves in response to new experiences, learning, and even injury. Think of it as your brain being able to literally build new roads and reroute traffic. The saying, "neurons that fire together wire together," perfectly captures this process. The more we repeat a thought or an action, the stronger the neural connection for that behavior becomes. This is a powerful truth because it means our brains are not fixed. They are dynamic and can be intentionally sculpted. One of the most effective ways to reshape our brain is through the intentional formation of new, healthy habits. As we've discussed, habits are formed through the repetition of an action, which strengthens the associated neural pathways. By consciously choosing the habits we want to develop and consistently repeating them, we can gradually strengthen the neural pathways that support those new habits and weaken the ones tied to the habits we want to get rid of. This process takes time and effort, but the potential for change is immense. Mindfulness and meditation are other practices that have been scientifically proven to have a significant positive impact on the brain. Through mindfulness practice, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment or attachment. This practice can help us increase self-awareness, reduce stress, and improve self-control. Neuroscience research shows that regular meditation can lead to physical changes in the brain's structure, including an increase in gray matter density in areas associated with attention and emotional regulation. New learning and new experiences are also powerful drivers of neuroplasticity. Every time we learn something new, our brain forms new neural connections. By continuously challenging ourselves with new experiences and knowledge, we can keep our brains flexible and adaptive. This could be anything from learning a new language, mastering a new skill, or even simply reading a book on an unfamiliar topic. It is important to remember that brain change is a gradual process. There is no quick fix or magic pill for changing deep-seated habits or mindsets. However, with awareness, intention, and persistence, we have the ability to influence our brain's architecture and steer ourselves toward the changes we desire. It's like training a muscle. With consistent practice, we can strengthen our mental muscles for self-control, focus, and happiness. This is not about being a slave to our biology, but about becoming the architect of our own minds.
As we conclude this journey, we've delved into the complex layers of the human mind, brain, and behavior. We've seen the role of neural impulses, neurotransmitters, social needs, the unreliability of memory, and the potential for addiction. We have also explored the brain's remarkable ability to change and adapt. And yet, after all this exploration, we may realize that a single simple answer to the question, why do we do what we do, simply doesn't exist. Human behavior is a complex dance between biology, environment, past experiences, and those small moments of will that may not be as free as we imagine. Perhaps the most important takeaway from this journey is the recognition of our own complexity. We are not monolithic entities with a single clear ruler. We are a collection of interacting systems, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. Recognizing this complexity can foster a greater sense of empathy for ourselves and for others. We are all navigating the labyrinth of our own minds, influenced by forces often beyond our conscious control. So, what does all this mean for the idea of a self? Are we just a collection of neurons and molecules reacting to stimuli, or is there something more? These are the questions that take us into the realm of philosophy and consciousness, an area where science is still striving to understand its boundaries. Perhaps the journey to understanding why we do what we do isn't about finding a final answer, but about the process of exploration itself. Every question we ask, every concept we understand, brings us closer to understanding the greatest mystery of all, ourselves. This is just one of the many incredible mysteries that exist in our universe. If you were fascinated by this story and want to continue exploring the frontiers of human knowledge, there is so much more waiting for us to dive into. If you want to keep learning and discovering more amazing scientific secrets, don't miss the next adventure. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Let's continue this scientific journey together.